Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. This is a very feisty group for a cold and rainy London evening. I love that. That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Well, welcome and good evening. I'm Mary Ann Lewis. I'm the dean here at the Cass Business School, and I am delighted to welcome you all here tonight and to welcome Helena Morrissey to give the dean's lecture this evening on new approach to diversity, how to develop more inclusive cultures from here. I think as part of the opening, and I'm certainly going to introduce Helena more in greater detail, I want to give a little bit of an introduction to those of you who haven't had the opportunity to know Cass, and particularly in terms of a context for tonight. So Cass Business School is part of City University London. We're a leading global business school, consistently ranked now in the top 40 in the world of business schools, and we truly fuel the extraordinary. Events like tonight are central to who we are, specifically because we emphasize three interwoven elements. We emphasize knowledge and education and community, but it's really at the intersection that we can make a bigger difference. In fact, a unique difference, because we're capable of fueling thriving and sustainable careers, organizations, and societies. So if I can pick apart each of those just a little bit, give you a flavor for tonight. Regarding knowledge, we're a research institution. We know it's vital to remain on the cutting edge in terms of knowledge creation and in terms of our own research, but also learning from tremendous experts like Helena this evening. In the recent UK Research Excellence Framework, we were assessed with 84% of our research recognized as either world-leading or internationally excellent, and we were ranked second in Europe for impact on research in terms of business and policy. But more specific to tonight, let me give you a couple of examples. We have a remarkable Cass Academic Women's Initiative, a number of our faculty here tonight, and we have great examples of people who live the practice of their research. People like Professor Paula Jarzabowski, who serves on the steering committee of the Independent Women in Insurance Network. Likewise, our Deputy Dean, Professor Jo Sylvester, who I'm seeing smiling right now. Her research with UK government departments has shown that Black and minority ethnic civil servants struggle more than their white counterparts to reach senior positions in Whitehall, and that it's largely due to the dominance of informal decision-making processes and networks. Regarding education, we teach nearly 4,000 students across levels from undergraduate to postgraduate to PhD to executive education. And embedded within those education opportunities are important experiential opportunities like student organizations, the Cass Women in Business Society, Cass Women in Consulting Groups. I know we have some of their members here tonight, but I'm also very pleased to announce tonight that we are in rapid development of 2 new executive MBA scholarships for the 30% Club. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the 30% Club in a minute, but we're very pleased to have full engagement with Helena and the work that she's doing. And then the third element is the community. Absolutely critical to fueling our vibrant, innovative, and global experience here at Cass. When you look at our alumni and our corporate partners, they span right now, about 37,000 individuals over 150 plus countries. That's truly a global network, and they are partners. We reach out to them and serve as a hub in a number of ways. We have events like tonight, or the International Women's Day event on Tuesday, the 8th of March, in which one of our professors, Dr. Amanda Goodall, is amongst the speakers. We have centers like our Mergers and Acquisition Research Center and Professor Scott Mueller, who's up here in the back, who has leveraged the opportunity, and their chairman, and yes, she insists on becoming chairman of the advisory board of Mark, since its inception, is Susan Kilsby, who's also the chairman of Shire Pharmaceuticals, and thus, at least as of last year, is one of only 3 women who serve as the chairs of FTSE 100 firms. Lastly, we do opportunities like master classes. We have a master class coming up on March 8th for the City Women Network on the new meaning of resilience in the face of digital change, led by Professor John Vito Lanzillo. So these give you, I hope, some of the ideas of how we make the most of knowledge, education, and community, and really their powerful intersection. And I hope you can feel that energy here tonight. The Dean's Lectures are a perfect example of how we bring this to life, and with our speaker, Helena Morrissey. Helena is the CEO of Newton Investment Management. She joined the organization in 1994 as a fixed income fund manager and was appointed CEO in 2001. In June 2014, she was named chair of the Investment Association, the UK's industry trade body whose members manage £5 trillion. She also chairs Opportunity Now, Business in the Community's Gender Diversity Campaign, and she recently joined the Financial Services Trade and Investment Board. In 2009, after attending a diversity event, Helena began working on a project that clearly became a passion, or maybe it was vice versa, or a little bit of both. It aimed at achieving 30% of women on UK corporate boards through voluntary and business-led change. And in 2010, the 30% Club was launched. The 30% Club has now expanded internationally, with clubs in 10 countries around the world, including the US, Hong Kong, Italy, and the Gulf cooperation countries. Now she's focusing on bettering the gender balance at each stage of the journey, from schoolroom to boardroom, and hence our role in the scholarships here at CAS. Helena Morrissey has been named one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. For 2 consecutive years, she was voted one of the 50 most influential people in finance by Bloomberg Markets magazine. She is a fellow of the Society of Investment Professionals, a fellow of the London Business School, I almost made a crack, I won't, and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. And in 2012, Helena was appointed a CBE in the New Year's honors list. So please, join me in welcoming Helena Morrissey to deliver her lecture, A New Approach to Diversity.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's very wonderful to be here. I'm quite honoured by the turnout as well, and I'm really looking forward to both having a talk but also hearing from you, and I will allow plenty of time for questions. Now, I think in today's world, then the idea of improving diversity, and diversity as part of what it takes to develop healthy organisational cultures, what it takes to have good corporate governance, what it takes to really have a modern, forward-looking business. I think that's well accepted and understood. And I think you'd find that most leaders of organisations would say that having improved diversity from the obviously imperfect situation that we still have today is one of their top priorities in their time as in their leadership time. However, once you look beneath that goal, often you find that the actual initiatives, the approach rather, that people are taking in their organisations are either very much siloed, they're delegated to certain people to resolve, or perhaps at best it's down to a number of specific initiatives. It's not really embedded, it's not really day-to-day behaviours that people are seeking to change. I think that we have right now both the opportunity and frankly the necessity to take a different approach. The current one is meaning there is inevitably a gap between the walk and the talk, and it has meant that the rate of progress to improving diversity has been very slow. Now, I'm quite optimistic at this stage that we can make a breakthrough, and that optimism is largely founded on my experiences in founding and leading the 30% Club, where over the past 5 years, and I'll have to just get the little clicky here, so lovely shape of the line there, you know. We've gone from about 12.5% women on FTSE company boards to over 26%, and that was only over 5 years. And of course, you can see from the shape of the line before the 30% Club started and other initiatives as well, that we were stuck on very little progress, a bit like the general diversity issues that we have in many organisations today. And I guess the strapline there, if you can see it, the most important thing, though, for me during that was that this began to be seen differently, that it was shifted, the mindset shifted around the issue, that it wasn't seen so much as a women's issue anymore, but as everybody's issue, as a business issue. At the same time, I should mention that 100% of these FTSE companies appointed at least one woman to their board. And you can imagine, you know, that 100th, just how intense the competition was not to be that very last one. If you are interested, it was Glencore. But anyway, look what happened to them. Anyway, it was nothing to do with that. But really, as I say, the mindset shift, and then seeing how, I suppose what was fascinating to me, I learned a lot about affecting change through this experience, a lot that I certainly was not aware of going into the 30% Club, was that once the penny drops, that this is a really important thing, then all of those apparently insurmountable obstacles to achieving change, achieving a faster rate of progress, suddenly, if not melt away, then they become surmountable, that actually you suddenly see a breakthrough. Now, of course, it's not the only area. I'm going to focus on diversity, but as I said, I've learned a lot about affecting change through this, and there are many other areas where I think a similar change in approach can be taken to greater effect. One parallel that I've recently been aware of, it wasn't my idea, Christiana Figueres, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, contacted me, and she said she wanted to meet, which is obviously a great honour, and I met her, and she said she was interested in exploring, what had it taken for the penny to drop in what I had done on the gender diversity issue, along with, as I say, many others. Because she wanted to compare it in terms of what she had achieved over the 6 years since she had taken on her role at the UN. And if one contrasts the breakthrough at Paris with how we'd had an impasse around that issue in Copenhagen 6 years ago, it's pretty similar. And we both realised that, of course, the answer's pretty obvious in some ways, that change happens when those in power, with the power to make the change, actually believe suddenly that it's in their interests to do so. Now, of course, achieving that realization is perhaps the trickier part, and so I wanted to go over how it happened within the 30% Club, and also, if I may, share a bit of my own career journey. It is a bit of a personal story, but I think it does have a parallel with this broader issue about how change is evolving, particularly around the issue of diversity. So I'm going to take you back 30 years, don't worry, I'm not going to go through each of those 30 years. To actually, when I was still at school, I was the only girl in my maths and further maths A-level classes. And to be honest, it was a somewhat dispiriting experience for me, right at the beginning anyway. We had 2 male maths teachers. I was sort of gangly, awkward teenager. I wasn't that much good at maths. You may notice in my story there's a masochistic streak that runs through. And actually, it was quite a dysfunctional group. No one helped each other. People were quite sort of competitive. There was really no sense of people collaborating ever to help each other solve the most difficult problems. And I struggled significantly in that environment. Gradually, and this was not an overnight process, as I became a little bit better, a little bit more proficient at the syllabus, then I realized that I was beginning to be accepted into the group. And although obviously I was still very much the token female, as we might describe it today, there was a sort of thawing and a sort of genuine shift in the group dynamic as I was brought into the mix. My approach to working has always been more collaborative, and I'm not saying that I would take the credit for this in terms of the whole group. It was more that they met me as well as I met them. But I was aware that we became more effective as a group. And then I'm convinced it was partly because I say there was only one girl, but as they kind of changed their approach, and it had a big impact, I think, on me later on in thinking about how teams operate. To be honest, it helped me as well grow in confidence, and when I left then university and started my career, in my case in a big traditional asset management firm, I must admit I thought that the world of work was a world of equal opportunity, and you could get on as far as your ability and how hard you worked took you. And so I was shocked, to be honest, and very disappointed to realize that my gender was an issue, because in my case it was very overt. I came back from my first maternity leave at the age of 25. I had hardly even walked back in the door, and there was the sort of round of promotions. I was very junior, and this was supposed to be a sort of, a given that you would get that first rung on the ladder. And I was passed over, and I asked my boss, what I need to do differently. And I just said, oh, well, there's some doubt over your commitment because you just came back after having a baby. Well, no one would say that now, and I'm sort of grateful that they spelled it out so clearly. But, I was the only a woman in a team of 16 fixed income fund managers. So, what did I do? The term hadn't really been invented then, but I suppose thinking about it, I sort of leaned in. And I did decide to leave. I did realise that I was not single-handedly going to be able to change the culture in this particular organisation. But I did join a smaller, more entrepreneurial type firm. But I did look for opportunities. I did ensure that I had a seat at the table. And in all honesty, I sort of realised that I had to play by the existing rules as they were. I was still very much, there were very few women in the organisation that I joined, and I realised that I had to behave in a certain way while trying to be authentic to myself to fit in enough to get that seat at the table, to be given the opportunities. And I think that's changed quite a bit, and I'll come back to that because it's a big part of why I think we have this opportunity now as a new approach. Now, I did not fit in one sense, or did not at least take conventional route in one sense, because my husband and I continued having more children. Didn't let that first experience put us off. And probably know where this all ends anyway. And by the time we had our third and fourth are very close in age. And he and I sat down one day and discussed how we were going to make this work. I mean, literally the third and the fourth are one year apart. And we were struggling with the three. And he was a journalist and suggested that he went freelance. And to be honest, I thought this was quite a normal conversation a husband and wife would have, in terms of how to combine bringing up a family and careers and so forth. But I now realise that was quite unusual to be as a partnership. And that has taught me, again, as you'll see running through this, the power of having a very sort of not being hidebound by traditional roles, but actually sort of working through in a quite a personal way. Obviously, everybody has their own path. Anyway, that has definitely been a big part of sort of how I've made things work, but still we carried on. And then when I was age 35 and we just had our fifth child, didn't really learn very quickly on this, I was offered the quite unexpected opportunity to become Newton's Chief Executive Officer. Now, when I joined Newton, I was quite junior. I was sort of number two on a sort of very small part of the business, and as gradually, though, as I had done this leaning in bit and looked for opportunities, Newton, which is quite a meritocratic, it is quite an entrepreneurial culture, I've been given more opportunities. And I suppose, again, with hindsight, I had brought a slightly different leadership style to how I, for example, ran the bond team when I was running the bond team. I did tend to sort of draw in different views. I didn't run it quite the same way. And then when we were acquired by Mellon back in 2001, we did lose quite a few people. And although no one expressed it exactly like this at the time, I think I was asked to do this job by my colleagues because there was some sort of recognition that I might be able to sort of unite the team and build the team. But it wasn't exactly a textbook sort of journey to be the CEO. I was literally plucked from the floor overnight, and I had no business training or management training. I shouldn't say this in a business school, really, should I? And the company ran £20 billion of money. We were somewhat impaired because of the departures that we'd had. But obviously you learn quickly when these sorts of, both the opportunity comes along, but also given that there's no sort of clear path. Now, inevitably, because I was trying to obviously earn my credibility, I had the job title, but earn my credibility as the chief executive, make sure that the business was not just stable, but growing again. I didn't, in all honesty, spend any time thinking about the diversity issue. I'm lucky in one way that fund management is a career. It's not a question of hours at the desk so much as results, and the same for managing the business. But I was just very focused on those results. Gradually, though, became very much aware that younger women were coming up to me and asking particularly about how do you combine a career and family. And I felt a desire, a very strong desire, to help them perhaps not go through quite the same experiences, but have an easier ride. I also was doing a lot of thinking about, Newton has a very team-based approach to investing. And I had become very conscious about the need to have balanced teams. I believe, and this is why I think one of the reasons why we have such a great opportunity now to make headway in this area, is that increasingly people are realizing that homogeneity of thought, which is so often linked to not just gender, but homogeneity of socioeconomic background, to age, to ethnicity, to sexuality and so forth, that's very risky. It's very retro. It doesn't make you fit for solving the problems. And I was increasingly conscious of that. So really in these two things came together, and like many people have done, I set up a women's development network within Bank of New York Mellon. This was now about 10 years ago. And to be honest, everything seemed to go well. It was, we held these events, we always invited men, we had some very exciting and inspiring speakers, but I became quite disappointed and disillusioned that, again, we were seeing a disconnect between the talk and the results. And I was very conscious that I didn't want to be sort of pretending to ourselves that we were making headway if we really weren't. And in all honesty, I was sort of about to down tools on this whole project. And then I was invited, Adit's already mentioned, to an event in 2009. I was actually a speaker at Goldman Sachs Diversity Week, and after we had a lunch, and there were probably about 15 different organizations represented there, men and women, and each of us shared what we had been doing to try to improve the proportion of senior women in our organizations, and frankly, no one was getting anywhere. And I came away, I thought, we must be just doing something completely wrong then. I mean, so much effort, so little to show for it. And that's when I began thinking about a new approach. And I didn't know what the answer was, but I did start reading really widely, particularly around how groups behave and how you can create the best groups. And obviously I had to read more generally about how you can affect change and how you can persuade people. And I sort of came up with two things then. One was that we needed a measurable goal with a deadline. I mean, it sounds pretty basic thing. I'm very anti-legislative quotas. I'm very happy to be challenged on that later, but I do believe that it's a very sort of old-fashioned sort of combative approach to solving something that is actually more about creating a collaborative, inclusive culture. So I think it's a bit ironic to approach that through quotas, and I believe in people believing in something and believe that then you'll make it happen more genuinely and more lastingly if you do. I then thought that we need, as Denise already said, now we look at much broader levels in all levels in all organisations, but the initial aim was around the boards, and clearly we needed to involve those in power more. And that's where the penny dropped for me, that the key members of the 30% Club needed to be not the women, but the powerful white heterosexual middle-aged men who are running British businesses. And that, in all honesty, was, I suppose, the main, lever of change in terms of getting some actual results. They had the board, these were their boardrooms, so therefore they had the ability to actually change them. So approached a couple of chairmen that I knew quite well, Sir Roger Carr and Sir Wim Bischoff, and asked them what they thought of the idea of an initiative led by them, actually. I didn't say people like you, I mean them, to try to improve the proportion of women in the boardroom. And both of them immediately said yes. They both said, in their own words, that they've seen firsthand the difference, the improvement in the dynamic that having women in the boardroom has made, but they were frustrated that they couldn't get more women in the boardroom, that actually whenever it came to a search, the tendency was for the same candidates from the same gene pool, as it were, to be put in front of them. Now, of course, not everybody was quite as sort of enthusiastic at the start. And I did make a lot of mistakes, but one of them was soon after we launched in November 2010, someone let me know that somebody was very disappointed that I hadn't asked them to join the 30% Club. So I thought, I didn't realise I could ask the people I didn't know, so I'll start writing letters. I was very diligent, but I was only doing a few at a time, have a day job and various other things. I thought, I'll write to the 350. I was doing it alphabetically, so I didn't miss anybody. I started at A and got down to HA for Hansen, by which time I was having sort of hate mail back from many of the A's and the B's. So I ceased and desisted on this plan, and I realised again, this was very much learning as I went along, that actually we needed to create this peer pressure, and that actually the biggest force for change was creating a sort of sense of, literally the club, that people want to be part of it, that there were peers that they respected, and that they wanted to join them. And initially, I'd say that it fell into sort of almost a third. You had evangelists, enthusiasts, people who very much got this, often had daughters who are reaching that sort of age where their careers were diverging from the path of their sons. Then you had the sort of wait and see, let's see how this all pans out. If it's successful, I'll join it kind of group. And then the sort of people who were very antagonistic to it. And of course, I say in a few short years, it's become very much sort of part and parcel of what everyone would expect, which again gives me quite a lot of hope that things can happen eventually quite quickly. Another characteristic of the 30% Club was to be, well, it's difficult to describe this. When we launched, the Evening Standard described us as having a very worthy aim, but very vague about how we're going to achieve it. And to be frank, they were right. I mean, we were very vague. We had this goal, but because nothing had really worked up until then, there wasn't a roadmap to follow. And obviously that meant we had to write a new map. We had the destination, but we didn't know how we were getting there. But in all honesty, that vagueness turned out to be very important because it meant that we listened. We asked many companies, people came to us voluntarily and said, you know, what they felt was going wrong with their efforts in this regard. And so what we weren't trying to do was do anything that was competing with anything out there. We're very much working in partnership with so many other people doing great work in this space, working very closely with Lord Davis, whose review came out a few months after we launched, for example. But we were listening and adapting and adjusting as we went through. And then we created, I guess the other point was to realize that we couldn't just do one thing. So we was, see, I have to put this up because this will give me the credits and the shout out to Cass as well, because what we realized that we just need to get something going where it's not just the chairman saying, we must do this, everybody do it, but we then had to create a program. We had to diagnose the problem better. We had to work on the education side, you know, obviously including at schools and business schools and universities. We had to make sure that we were catching those women coming into organizations so they wouldn't develop the resilience if there was some knocks along the way, like I had experienced. We have a big mid-career mentoring program that involves about 43 organizations and 650 people now, where we again looking at people who've maybe 5 to 10 years into their career and perhaps again wavering in terms of the progress that they're making. Very big investor group, Ian McVeigh is in the audience and has been very involved in that from Jupiter. We have to measure the progress. It is important to recognize as a global phenomena, and already we mentioned that actually we're now in 11 countries, I just update that. And that might help amplify local efforts as well if we can create this approach to change. And that obviously work with politicians, but not in a party political way. This is a cross-party initiative. And then back to those in power within the businesses and at the top of organizations. And then you keep going round and round and sort of create this virtuous circle. And everybody has been very, very generous with their time, with their resources. The CAS 30% Club scholarships are fantastic. We have, I think that makes us 17 business school scholarships now that we have different schools around, mostly in the UK, but a couple more internationally. And the idea there is they have different parameters. Some involve a competition around a topic related to gender diversity or diversity. Many schools set a goal as well around the female intake on their MBA and executive MBA programs, etc. And again, what you're just trying to do is create this joined up program of change. Now, all of this is well and good, and it's all been very exciting. But I suppose to me, going back to the point about the mindset shift, the biggest thinking of me have been, well, why now? Why is this working now? Why is there this realization that actually, you know, you echo the words of the Canadian Prime Minister, you know, it could be just because we're when he was appointed Prime Minister and announced a 50-50 gender balance in his cabinet and asked why, he said, well, it's because it's 2015. You know, there could be an element of that. But also we know that, you know, still lots of work to do. Before I get too carried away, there are still more men named John who are CEOs or chairs of FTSE 350 companies than there are women with like all the names. So, so let's not get too sort of carried away. But we know that there is this sort of movement for change that seems to have taken on a different lease of life. And I believe that there is this realization that actually organizations are missing out significantly if they're not getting a better balance between whether it's men or women, whether it's masculine or feminine perspectives, that there is this need. 30% Club early adopters might not have quite expressed it in this way, but they realized that their boardrooms were deficient because they had this imbalance. Now, I have done a lot of reading and research. I mean, I'm obviously not a neuroscientist, but I am convinced that men and women are very, very different, equal but different. And actually, one of the reasons why now businesses, all organizations actually are keen to address is because there's this realization that we have to develop a culture where both genders and other types of underrepresented groups can rise and create more balance at all levels because we complement each other. So I get into trouble sometimes when I say women and men. I mean, there are masculine and feminine traits, obviously, that men and women can have the other one, as it were. But on balance, women do tend to be more empathetic and men more systematic in their approaches. It's why I think we definitely don't want a 100% club of anything. But obviously, I think what you end up with is people thinking now, whereas before they were thinking more in tokenism, that actually we need a few female faces that are actually thinking much more about the development of the right teams, going back to my early thoughts when I became CEO of Newton. Harvard Business Review has this fantastic, very short article, which is entitled, "What Makes a Team Better? More Women." And I kid you not, they did 2 sets of experiments. They did it twice because they didn't believe the results of the first time. For what it's worth, a male and a female professor, and they created single-sex groups and then mixed-sex groups, and they asked them to solve problems. And the lower IQ mixed-sex groups repeatedly performed better than the higher IQ single-sex groups. And if you're interested, they had to keep adding women into the mix till they got to 70% before the results peaked, but you know. And I think now we are now onto this thing about how can we improve further from where we are today. And one of the things that I don't think has really been tackled yet, which I think is really important, is we have to rethink the world of work. It's a big one. I think when I look at how so many aspects of our lives have changed over the past, well, more than quarter of a century since I started working. You know, technology and globalization have obviously transformed just about every aspect of how we consume, socialize, actually work when we get to work and so forth. But actually the practices of working, most of us still work in the same way as our parents did. We sort of take the commute, we sit at a desk. We might work around those office hours, but we really are only scratching the surface at using what could be different approaches to working so that people can work in a more, I suppose, from any time, any place, anywhere in the world, where work becomes more of an activity for many jobs anyway than a place. And of course I had the advantage of seeing the next generation and what they're expecting out of their working life. My husband and I went on to have 9 children. Let's get that fact out there, so clear. And we have 6 girls and 3 boys. And so obviously I have a vested interest in the females of the next generation. I have to declare that. But it's obviously fascinating to see how they are slightly mystified that this is, you know, and I'm sure it's the same for others of you who have teenagers or younger or older children, that they're slightly mystified that this is even still a topic. You know, when they're at school or university, there is a sense that actually, you know, we should be way past this. And actually, one of the things that they're expecting is that they can make a contribution anytime, any place, anywhere in the world for many jobs anyway. And I think, again, we haven't made that what Peter Thiel might call that 0 to 1 moment when we sort of leapfrog over, you know, evolving our practices to really rethinking them. And I think that's a really big opportunity. I do also think that, and I hope that 30% Club work, which involves so many people doing so many wonderful things, is also slightly changing the dynamic about people thinking that actually this is the question of just putting a few more women at the top and then, you know, we're job done, we're all sorted here. I actually think that sometimes having a few more women in senior roles can mask the lack of progress that you're making elsewhere. I would even suggest, even when we had, you know, Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister here, we all thought, well, there's been a huge breakthrough in gender equality, but actually I don't think that was really the case at the time. I'm often asked now whether I would, how I feel about the possibility of the first female president in the States. I'm not going to get on a dangerous political ground now, but in all honesty, it doesn't really matter to me whether we have a female president. It's more the approach that's brought to bear on the world's problems. And I would like to see, obviously, if it's the same militant sort of approach to conflict resolution, that's still perpetuating the pattern that we've been. I want to see that we have not just a few women brought to the same sort of club, but actually that we end up changing what we discuss, reprioritizing what corporations discuss. So bring it back to that example that I referred to briefly earlier with on climate change. Christiana and I are co-hosting an event in April, which we're calling 2 Degrees of Change, and it's her idea, the idea being that now there are a few more, at least, women in senior roles at companies, and companies are more aware of these issues. Is there a way that climate change actions can be reprioritized, elevated in the corporate agenda? So it's not just women bringing fresh pair of eyes to the same old problems, but changing what is actually discussed. Obviously, again, not for its own sake, but to make our businesses better, to make us more resilient, and to make us more future-proof. And I think that's quite exciting. It's not about asking a few women to join the men's club, but actually women to be women once they become, all the way through their careers. And that's something, again, that I feel, I mentioned it briefly, that early on I had felt the need to fit in. As I have grown in my career, then I have felt that I can be more authentic. I've certainly encouraged and continue to encourage anybody around me to also bring themselves to work, to be themselves at work, because the difference is valuable as well. But I still think we've got obviously some way to go before we are really sort of completing that journey, that actually some of this has raised the possibility, but it does require that we encourage. I mean, I think that we realise now, because we complement each other's differences, that actually women need to be women in the workplace, otherwise there's no point having diversity at all. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that for my daughters. I believe that they can be themselves and need to be themselves if we are going to see the fruits of all of this effort. I also, this is where I want to end before I take questions, I also hope that all this work will lead to more options for men. Because my husband, who's at home now, he doesn't have time with all of his children now to do much in the way of, do any paid work, which is a lot of work. He says to me that he enjoys what he does, and that he feels that perhaps a lot of other men would like to have that option. But actually, the way that sort of social pressures, but also just norms about working practices and so forth, are that it's still very unusual 16 years after he first stopped working full time. And again, the logical extension of this is that we're not sort of, I suppose, automatically assuming that people have certain roles in life, but that actually we make it work for each of our families, for each of our businesses, and in so doing, I hope, have happier, more productive times. Thank you for listening.